Hello, everyone, and welcome. Today, I am joined by Ed Cannon, the CEO and president of Far East Broadcasting Company, or FEBC. Thank you, Ed, for joining. We are going to talk a little bit about the Sunlight Readathon, and one of the companies or one of the missionary agencies that are joining us is FEBC. I am so excited to learn more about FEBC and talk with you about your company. If you have not heard about the Read for Missions, the Sunlight Readathon that we're doing, please visit sunlight.com/read-a-thon to learn more. But we are partnering with 4 different mission agencies to help support the unreached peoples of the world, and we're inviting you all to join us. You get to read great literary biographies with your children and learn more about the Christian faith and what missionaries are doing out in the world, as well as raising money. So I'm so excited. Thank you, Ed, for joining.
It's my privilege. It's an honor to be here with you.
Yes, I am so appreciative. Tell us a little bit about FEBC, or Far East Broadcasting Company.
Sure, I'm happy to. FEBC was started 75 years ago. On the tail end of the Second World War, one of our founders was a radio expert for the military in the South Pacific, setting up radio communications for the Army and the Navy and the Air Force so that they could effectively defeat a common enemy. And our founder realized the power of radio in that. And when the war was over, he was asked by the U.S. military to dismantle all the equipment that they had set up for the purposes of wartime communication and just get rid of it, dispose of it. And so he asked of the government, would there be any chance we could use some of these radio transmitters privately? And they said, well, what are you going to use it for? He said, I want to take the gospel into the unreached nation of China via radio. And the US government said, yes, you go right ahead. And so he started with a vision to use radio to take the gospel into China. And over the next decades, FEBC's success in taking the gospel to China spread to Indonesia, Korea, the Philippines, Japan, Southeast Asia, and now we're broadcasting in almost 50 countries in over 140 languages. But we only have one message, and that's the message of hope through Jesus Christ. And we have, since our beginning, had a real intent focus on using indigenous people who best understand the local cultures to broadcast the gospel via radio in those countries to the least reached. So we don't focus on countries that are filled with churches or have all been evangelized. We concentrate on least reached people, indigenous speakers who understand the local culture, speaking in the native tongue and dialect so that people most effectively understand. And now we're receiving millions, literally, of responses from people every year. And we have tens of millions of followers on social media platforms because they're hungry for the gospel. And when we present God's word, God's way, people want to hear.
That's a touching story. Thank you. Tell us a little bit, you mentioned it, but tell us a little bit about the 1040 window and why you guys, FEBC has chose to really focus on that window.
Sure. Well, it's interesting. What we really chose to do was focus on the least reached people on the planet. And we were kind of accidentally targeting the 1040 window, which is a strip of the planet between longitudes of 10 and 40 degrees north of the equator, which is where 95% of the people, the unreached people in the world, live. So we targeted unreached people, and it so happened to be that that was the 1040 window. Interestingly, also within the 1040 window are 90% of the poorest people on the planet. So these are people living under great duress, difficult circumstances, and have not had the opportunity to hear the gospel. So if our approach is to go after the least reached people, it's natural that FEBC's concentration is, of course, the 1040 window. And if you'll recall the list of countries I just mentioned, they're all right in the middle of all that.
Absolutely. How does FEBC make an impact in teaching unreached people about Jesus? You mentioned the radios and the indigenous people. How does that actually work?
Yeah, actually what we do, we think about radio here in the US, and radio is about a one-way communication. It's about someone behind a microphone on a big, powerful radio station talking to people in the communities. FEBC's philosophy is quite a bit different on that. One of our strategic pillars is close to the listener. So in addition to broadcasting the gospel and the truth of God's word, we try and engage the listeners in a conversation. Many of our staff are out in the communities on a regular basis, meeting with listeners, listener gatherings. We'll say on the radio, our broadcasters are going to be in Battambang, Cambodia, Wednesday afternoon. Would you come and join us, and we'll share some worship, and we'll tell you more about the radio. We'll hand some radios out to people that don't have one, and we'll talk about the gospel of Jesus Christ. And this endears us to the listeners, and we become part of the community. We truly believe in being close to the listeners. We've had circumstances where our staff have gone out to local communities, and why 1,000 people would show up from a tiny little community, and we'd talk about the gospel, we'd talk about the radio, we'd hand out radios, and people would say, there's no pastors here in our city. Could we have some baptisms? Because there's many people who have accepted Christ but haven't been baptized yet. So a pastor on our staff will do a baptism at a listener gathering. So it's more than just broadcasting, it's connecting. And one of the ways that I see that being very effective these days is through what we call social media. You think about social media, is it really not radio, but it's really broadcasting. We don't care what platform we're on. It's all about content, because content is king, and we believe content is king when the king is in the content. So we're using these mediums where we can talk with people as opposed to talking to people. And when we do that, you build a relationship, and you build it on the truth of God's word, and people come to faith.
Absolutely. So if people decide to choose FEBC to support with the Sunlight Readathon, what would that look like? What exactly is their support going to be doing for FEBC?
Sure. Well, we've decided on this partnership for fundraising that we would target giving out radios to people. So for every $20 gift that a reader or a supporter gives to this project, Sunlight matches it. And that is enough money for FEBC not only to buy a radio, but to deliver the radio into the hands of somebody that's seeking God's word and will use that radio effectively for the purposes of letting us evangelize them and many people around them. Each radio in each country is very different. People listen to FM radio in some countries, shortwave in some countries, AM radio in some countries, and most of the radios we give out will be fixed tuned to our station. So they can't use that radio to listen to Elvis Presley or rock and roll music. They listen to God's word on FEBC's Christian broadcasts. And we know it's effective because so many people in these radio distributions come begging, I want a radio. And we ask them when we give them the radio, how will you use this? And they'll say things like, well, you see, we don't have any pastor or we don't have any church. This radio will be God's word into the hearts of me and my family. And we see it working. So it's not just a one-off. It's a 1 times 20 or maybe even 50 as they pull their family and local people together to listen to the radio. So they will help by each person being able to offer radio to a family to hear God's word.
That's awesome. So I love the specificity. Can't say that word right now. I like how we can exactly know what it is. $20 equals $40, which equals a radio in someone's hand. Perfect.
Right.
How does fundraising support change the lives of those impacted?
Well, in addition to things like radios, of course, we have staff that put together broadcasts. We have transmitters in FEBC that have to be electrically powered. we have to buy them, we have to maintain them. So the expense of actually doing broadcasting is pretty enormous. Some of the radio stations we have are hundreds of thousands of watts. And so the electric bill is high. The maintenance on those facilities is high, but their reach is phenomenal. So everything that FEBC does requires funding, and we fund only the transmission of the gospel of Jesus Christ. We're laser focused on that. Our mission is to use media to broadcast the gospel, to inspire people to follow Jesus Christ. So every gift to FEBC goes directly to the discipleship and evangelism of people all around the world. Specifically on this project, you're delivering a radio into the hand of someone who can't afford to buy one. We looked at some of the listeners we've got across our organization, and they're living on a $5 a month salary to feed an entire family. So to buy a $30 radio would be impossible for them to consider. But through kind gifts of people like we're having in this partnership, we buy the radio and provide the facilities to actually get it into the hands of the right people, which is not an easy task in countries like Thailand and Indonesia.
So the fundraiser is a very short window. I think it's about 6 weeks. How can families continue to support FEBC after the fundraiser is over?
Sure. Well, I would encourage them to go to FEBC.org. It's our webpage. We have a number of projects listed there. We talk about the outreach of FEBC. You can hear testimonies of people who have come to faith in Jesus Christ through the radio. And of course, if you have a specific country or project that you'd like to fund, we welcome those kind of restricted gifts, or just a general gift to FEBC would keep the gospel going to many countries all around the world. And, you know, my opportunity to actually go and hear listeners and see the difference it makes in their lives. I don't have enough time to explain it. Let me just share one story with you. We were in Indonesia, and there was a man who had signed up a number of his neighbors for local Bible study. Part of our outreach there is not only broadcasting, but we say to people, if you want to get involved with a group of people discussing the Bible, write us and we'll connect you with 6 or 7 people in your area. Well, one man had sent us about 100 requests to connect people to local Bible studies. So we went to visit him. And we went to visit him in his home. We realized he was almost totally deaf. And the reason that he had connected with so many people in his neighborhood was, in order for him to hear the radio, he had the volume up so loud, and his ear was right next to it, that all of the neighbors were hearing these Christian broadcasts. And many would come to him and say, you know, we've been listening to what your programs are saying, and we're very interested in how to learn more about Jesus Christ. Not being an evangelist himself, he simply takes the form, puts their name and address on it, puts it in an envelope and mails it to FEBC. And as a result, hundreds of people have become members of Bible studies because of his testimony.
What a great story. Thank you, Ed, so much for joining me today and telling us a little bit more about FEBC. Again, if you're interested in participating in the Sunlight Readathon, sunlight.com/read-a-thon. We hope you'll join us. And thank you so much, Ed.
You're welcome. God bless you.
Bye.